We are back on It's Always Game Day in Cincinnati. Lindsay Patterson, Mike Santagata here. Mike, how are you?
Surviving. I'm not as sick as I was last week, but the flu B or whatever it was is now like a respiratory infection, so that's cool. This is like the worst start I think I've ever had to a year. Pretty easy, right? Like being sick for multiple weeks. It's pretty rough.
Get it out of the system. Doesn't help when it's freezing outside. I'm sure you're dealing with snow like we are in Cincinnati right now. And
hmm
we just need January and February to go by. I'm always feeling pretty good in March.
Yeah, it gets warm. I missed that. It was single digits again last night. It's like this is terrible.
I think I said it on this podcast before, but I remember it was the Bengals 2021 regular season, 2022 postseason, because obviously it was January. But one of the sports writers just said the Cincinnati Bengals fans, they do not have a winter because you have the playoffs the whole month of January. Then you get into mid February, it's the Super Bowl. So that year flew by so fast. By the time the season was over, it was free agency, it was NFL draft time. But when you don't even make the postseason, it makes for a really long winter. And that's what we're kind of dealing with now. And for the Cincinnati Bengals, they obviously have some decisions that they need to make, even outside of the contract extensions. They will need to make that decision with T. Higgins in the next 2 months before free agency hits for him. Maybe it's another franchise tag on the way, or maybe they will find a way to get an extension, or they'll let him walk. But besides that, they have some coaching positions open. And I think the big one, and obviously defensive coordinator for them, still open. So far, we've only heard 2 interviews, DeMarcus Covington and Patrick Graham. I do want to note Patrick Graham did interview for the Jags head coaching job. And according to subscriber text over at Locked On, there's several fans of Graham in the Cincinnati Bengals building, and he's still in play over there for that defensive coordinator job. And just hearing from Raiders players over the last few weeks, a lot of people think a lot of the world pretty much of Graham as a coach. So we'll see if there's any other names that are getting thrown out there. Some good news for I think a lot of Bengals fans, and you can give your take on this too. Wink Martindale was making his round. He's interviewing for a couple jobs. I want to say the Falcons and the Colts, and one of the NFL Network guys tweeted out earlier that hey, maybe the Bengals would have an interest. Didn't say he was interviewing for the Bengals, but that definitely took off on social media because fans, they're not super huge on Wink. Everybody remembers that Ravens game when Joe Burrow put 500 plus on him and had himself a day. But outside of that, I think a lot of people wanted to stay away from Wink. But he's not coming to Cincinnati right now, according to Paul Dehner. There's really no interest in bringing him in as the defensive coordinator. And I would trust Paul Dehner over at The Athletic when it comes to that news. But any initial thoughts on if Wink would have been in the mix?
Um, my thoughts on that are just he's kind of like the anti-Anarumo, and it's not something I want. It's somebody that will do well against bad quarterbacks and mediocre teams and then shrivel up against the best teams, because when your entire system is based around blitzing like that, the elite NFL quarterbacks take advantage of it. I know everybody pointed to how Joe Burrow beat him. It's like, yeah, that's a great point. Like when Joe Burrow reached his elite status, he dominated Wink in those games. But I've heard the rebuttal like, oh yeah, but we would have Joe Burrow. It's like, yeah, but Patrick Mahomes is going to do the same thing, and I think Josh Allen is going to do the same thing, and Lamar Jackson's been so much better against the blitz. He might do the same thing at this point. So when you get to that, it becomes when the quarterback is no longer affected by those blitzes. What do you got? So I feel like that would be a defensive coordinator that would sure give you great results against Cooper Rush and Will Levis, and which I guess they had good results against those guys, but even like probably against Russell Wilson earlier this year. But what would be the point if every time you made the playoffs, it's a boat race anyway? It becomes the first of 45, if that even gets you the win. I mean, he gave up 32 and a quarter points per game to the Chiefs over his career, and those were all regular season games. And I think we all know the Chiefs, as good as they are in the regular season, they'd step it up a little bit in the playoffs. So I was never in on him. That was one of my least favorite possibilities. I think it would have been something that's like, oh yeah, like you'll get to you'll get a better defense. It's a floor raiser, but that's it. Like there's no ceiling on this defense. That's why the Ravens moved on and got better. And he would probably cost a lot too. Like it would be one of those situations where you look at that and go like, oh, we're paying for him instead of Dennis Allen or instead of Matt Eberflus or whoever. So I was never in on it. So I like that the Bengals were not in on it. I don't think it has anything to do with the bad feelings, although it is always weird that I feel like if I mention Mike Munchak as a possible offensive line coach, people still, and I was mad too at the time, people still hung up on the 2015 playoff game where he pulled Reggie Nelson's hair. And it's like, yeah, I was very mad at that time. That was 10 years ago. Like Martindale was making Burrow mad like 3 years ago. Like current players is who he was making upset. So I feel like there's a little bit of a difference there, but yeah, never my guy.
Yeah, you mentioned Eberflus. Some people are better coordinators versus head coaches, and obviously he has seen success. Again, NFL Network brought his name up over the weekend during the wild card weekend that he could be in those conversations for the defensive coordinator interview for the Cincinnati Bengals. It was kind of worded weird, almost like, is he a consultant? Are they going to him for advice, or are they interviewing him? And obviously there's been no more news. And I know a lot of Bengals fans, they want to say like, why aren't there more people? Why aren't they interviewing more people? If you know one thing about the Cincinnati Bengals, there are a few NFL insiders who will have that information, who they give that information to. They keep pretty quiet on a lot of things. You could even look at the Jamar Chase extension conversations, obviously the Joe Burrow extensions. They really don't have that out in the public too much. And I'm sure we'll hear a few more names over the next few weeks. Al Golden could be someone when Notre Dame, if they win on the playoffs will be over on Monday because the championship game is Monday. So maybe they have an interest in bringing him back to the defensive side in Cincinnati. But overall, I think that they're just keeping pretty quiet. Those are the only two names we know when it comes to interviews that they've had, Marcus Covington and Patrick Graham. But, if there's any other guys, and obviously those last two names that I did bring up, do you have an interest or one guy you like more than the other?
I have interest in all three of Golden, Eberflus, and Patrick Graham. I think one by one, Golden, excuse me, sorry. Like I said, respiratory. Golden, interesting. It's a little bit of a retread, because he was here, but it was when the defense was at its best, and he was part of the unit that improved the most and became a real strength of this team, the linebackers, and they've regressed since he left. So I find that interesting. He's had a lot of experience. He's done some stuff with Marcus Freeman and Notre Dame now. I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert on that, but what I read looks a lot different than what Lou Anarumo was doing, other than the other thing I read that was like his defense is complex and hard to pick up. And I was like, okay, yeah, so it is Anarumo still, possibly. But like they do a lot more man coverage, cover one type of stuff, where I feel like the Bengals have always been a little bit more cover two and quarters type of defensive back there. They'll play some man coverage, but I've never thought of them as a team that really majors in it. So I find it interesting. I find him very interesting because I feel like he gets the most out of those guys everywhere he's gone since at least I've known his name. Matt Eberflus, I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert on the Bears defense. I know when he was with the Colts, I wasn't interested because it was very vanilla. It was like cover two on every snap, rush four, and similar to Martindale, it's like if I know what this defense is going to be playing 70% of the time, I could take advantage of it. So I didn't really like that. I was like, yeah, you're asking a lot out of that pull runner. You're asking very little out of your corners, but a lot out of your safeties. It's if teams know you got to be a real good team to be able to beat an offense when they know what you're going to run. Like the Seattle cover three stuff. Well, yeah, when you have Richard Sherman and Cam Chancellor and Earl Thomas and another maniac on the outside like Brandon Browner, who's just going to jam the heck out of everybody and pick up penalties and doesn't care. That is, that is one way to be able to live. You are better. But I don't think this Bengals defensive unit, you would look at them and go like, yeah, they're just better than the offense. They could run whatever. They could just stand out there with their stand still and let them take their shot. No. But I hear he's more flexible in Chicago. So that has me a little bit more interested. It still looked like he was a 4-down, even front type of guy. But from what I read, He's a little bit more flexible. Sometimes he sends 5 or sends simulated pressures now where he drops a defensive lineman. People hate that, but I think that if they work, they're great. He also mixes up his coverages more now. So I'm interested in that because that could be seen as almost like the Dan Quinn. I think of Dan Quinn. He was always this cover 3 guy because he came from that Seattle scheme, went to Atlanta, went to a Super Bowl, and everybody just sees him like, he's boring. He's just like, he just runs cover 3 nonstop. And then he goes to Dallas and he puts his hat backwards and he starts cooking. And it's like, could that be Matt Eberflus? Like, he had his run as a head coach, and everybody's kind of seeing he's kind of boring. And then he gets to his defensive coordinator job and he starts cooking. Maybe wears a backwards hat. That'd be cool. But so that's why I'm a little bit interested, because I think from what I read, he was more flexible in Chicago when he didn't have the same talent. So can he bring that to Cincinnati? And Patrick Graham, interested. I've been interested in him since New York, although the results have been up and down. I feel like he has never really had a lot of talent, is the one thing to say. That Giants defense wasn't very talented, and that Raiders defense outside of Max Crosby has not been very talented. I mean, their second best player is either Trevon Moehrig or Adam Butler. I mean, I think the Bengals might have a better second best player. It's very Bengals-like, actually, when you think about it. Max Crosby, superstar edge rusher, and nobody else on that defense that would start on 30 other teams. So I find him interesting. He's another even front type of guy. He mixes up his coverages. He gets the most out of his guys. It'd be a new voice. When you get to the point of like, is this better than Lou Anarumo, is where I wonder. But maybe you can get more consistent production. Maybe you don't get the same production against the top end talent. Hopefully not terrible, but that was something Anarumo was pretty unique about, being able to take down Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes. Maybe you don't get that, but maybe a little more consistent production. I think both Eberflus and Graham are interesting. I think my favorite of those guys might be Golden, because I feel like he might have the Lou magic to be able to go toe-to-toe with Mahomes.
You mentioned Mahomes and Josh Allen, and obviously those are 2 quarterbacks. If you were in the postseason, that you're going to face. You're going to face one or the other, or maybe both. I think one of the biggest things I want to see out of this defensive coordinator, obviously, appreciate everything Lou Anarumo that we've talked plenty about him, but it really is the development of these players, because they've spent a lot of money when it comes to free agency. They've just spent a lot of money overall on the defensive side of the ball. Draft picks, there's still a lot of young guys in that room that you need to develop, Miles Murphy included. I would put Jordan Battle in that conversation. You want to see them succeed, continue to succeed. And I think all of that is extremely important. I wouldn't be surprised if at 17, they're picking another player on the defensive side of the ball. So all of that is extremely important. I do feel like Al Golden to come to Cincinnati to be taking a little bit of a pay cut. Not to make this the Bengals are cheap or anything like that, but Notre Dame's paying him a nice little penny over there. So we'll see if that's something that, he has an interest in getting back to the NFL. They, as an organization, I do think that they like someone that they're familiar with. And like you mentioned, he got a lot out of the linebacker room when he was here. So I think that's all extremely important. It's kind of wild. You haven't heard the connection to his name just yet as far as someone that they're interviewing. And maybe there's some college football playoff rules to that on when they can announce that. But I would feel like Tuesday morning, because we would be about little over 2 weeks into their defensive coordinator search, that would be a possibility, or someone they would at least want to interview. So I think all of that is extremely important. But the whole Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes, yes, you need a defensive coordinator and a defense that can get to those guys. But for me personally, it's so much about the AFC North and the division. Lamar. It's Joe, Lamar, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, any order anybody wants to put him in, that's totally fine. But those are the best quarterbacks in the NFL. That's what I watched. When I watched Wild Card Weekend, I thought, well, those are the top, 3 quarterbacks. Patrick wasn't playing. Joe's not playing. There's 4. And outside of that, it's a little bit of a gap to the next guy. And I think that defensive coordinator, you need to be successful in the AFC North. I want to see them get to the quarterbacks that they're facing in their own division, have a good defense against Lamar Jackson when you see him 2 times a year. You'll get to Josh, you'll get to Patrick later, but I think that should be a huge focus on this defensive unit and defense going forward, to something that they've struggled with over the last few years with Lou and his unit. So we'll see if there's some more names over the next few days. The last time that they had the search go into, obviously, it was after the Super Bowl. I felt like March-ish, because Lou Anarumo was like the 7th or 8th choice. I really kind of just want this wrapped up. Get your guy, get the guy you feel good about, do a few interviews, and get started on your decisions and what you're planning on doing. So I don't know. I don't want this to go too far into February or anything like that.
Yeah, because you want to fill out the rest of the staff too. You don't want to just be focused on defensive coordinator the whole time, and then maybe there's a great defensive line coach out there that you think can really maximize the talent on the team, and he kind of gets scooped up because you're still thinking of picking up your defensive coordinator and trying to figure out who will be out there when other guys have signed their defensive coordinator and he's filled out his staff. That's where I am on that. And you also want to be able to focus on the offensive line coach. I think that's a big hire. And filling out the defensive staff, filling out you're missing other coaches. Just get that all sorted out. But that all starts with the defensive coordinator. I mean, that's probably going to be your first guy that's hired. He's the most important hire out of all these guys. I would say figure it out. And maybe it has to do with they want to talk to Golden. Maybe they haven't been able to because of the championship run. So they want to be able to do that. It is weird that it felt like there was very fast, like, oh, wow, they're interviewing this guy. They're interviewing this guy. And then it was just all quiet after that. It's like they interviewed Patrick Graham. They interviewed that Patriots assistant, and then nothing. There's been just radio silence since then, besides hearing they're not interested in this guy. They're not interested in this guy. So maybe their search is narrow already, but they just haven't been able to interview everybody they want because of whatever reason. It could be playoff teams as well. They want to interview some of those playoff assistants and see if they want to come to Cincinnati, or at least get their thoughts about the defensive coordinator position. Sometimes you just interview guys to be able to pick their brain about football too.
All right, let's get to some mailbag questions, and then we'll do some quick divisional predictions. Mailbag questions. Make sure you're following Mike Bengals _Sand. You can follow me at LNDS Patterson. All right, a lot of defensive coordinator conversation, and I've been getting a few of these tweets. O-line coach, have you heard any candidates? How much would a new O-line coach actually help this offensive line?
I think what you're hoping for would be somebody who can marry their run and pass game a little bit better. I think Frank did what he could, and they ran some interesting stuff. But at his core, he is when you look at his history, he's more of a wide zone guy. He grew up coaching under Alex Gibbs, the wide zone, one of the forefathers of the wide zone with the Broncos. He was the offensive line coach for that Broncos team. And then he became, I believe it was the offensive coordinator for the Texans, and that's where Pollock got his start. And then he followed Bill Callahan around. Bill's a little bit of a mixture, so I think that helped him. But I think what you'd be hoping for is a guy that's got a little bit more ability to mix those two things, where maybe he has some history with spread systems or with a lot of shotgun runs, and being able to put all those together. Maybe it could be a college type of guy. Who knows? I think if you're looking for a miracle worker, that's going to be tough, which is what I would describe trying to turn some of these guys into high-end starters. Like when you draft a Cordell Volson outside the top 100 and he becomes a starter for 3 years, he was a 24-year-old guy that most people had pegged as a late day 3. I didn't watch him coming out until the Bengals took him. Then I watched him. I was like, looks limited to me athletically. So sky's not the ceiling here. So I thought they did what they could with him. But if you're looking for a miracle worker that can make like Jackson Carman, who didn't care off the field about getting better, like that is a big issue, or Alex Kappa, who gets injured and then never gets his athleticism back. Like if you're looking for somebody that can just turn those into gold, that's tough, because I don't think those were on Frank. And some of the other guys like Trey Hill and Deontay Smith, like those are later day 3 picks, and don't think you ever count on those guys being starters. So Mims was the first time they took somebody, and it seemed like, oh, they're actually going to bring somebody in that's athletic and talented and everybody sees as a first round pick, instead of Carmen was also seen as a day 3 type of guy, like universally thought of as as a highly talented player, not just me or somebody, but like everybody that watched him was like, yeah, this guy's really talented. He's athletic. He's young. He's played in big games. This is your first, big ball of clay. Mold it into what you need. And I thought Mims looked pretty good his first year. So maybe they'll get better buy-in from the front office. That has always been my issue with the offensive line. Is your offensive line coach just really isn't a miracle worker. I think that's the one thing you look at where it could help. certainly could help. But outside of Jeff Stoutland, Bill Callahan, and you saw what Bill could do in Tennessee, he couldn't make that right side work. He just didn't have the guys.
No.
Those guys, they're as close to miracle workers as you can get, but they're still not going to be able to turn nobodies into somebodies.
Yeah, and I think obviously the biggest part of their offensive line is the interior. They're going to move on from Alex Kappa and Cordell Bolson, and if they don't, that says a lot about the franchise as a whole. So we'll see if they spend it in free agency, if it's somebody in the draft, but you've got to replace the two worst guards in the NFL for Joe Burrow's sake and your run game. Both deserve it. So we'll see what it looks like in the offseason, but huge one for them and their new offensive line coach. Next Twitter question mailbag. Who is the dark horse candidate for the DC job? I know we've talked about a few names that we do like. Is there someone we haven't mentioned that you're seeing out there that you're a little surprised maybe isn't getting that attention or could be the guy?
I mean, guys like Jim Leonard and Steve Klingscale are the two I think of are like, I guess, dark horse because they're currently assistants. They've never been defensive coordinators. I don't know how interested the Bengals are. I mean, I think that Patriots assistant is a dark horse. I still haven't really considered him as a real contender for that defensive coordinator position. They interviewed him though, so maybe I should take it more serious. It's like those three, maybe. Two guys I like, and then they interviewed that guy, so they're interested. Why are they interested? I don't know, but maybe he's well thought of. I've never heard of him before the interview, and I actually don't think I've heard of him since.
They you know why they're interested? Because they always like to get the person who has success against them.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, we remember week 1. No, I'm just saying this, but it just feels like that's the connection, the only connection I can make. And nothing against him. Maybe he is a very qualified candidate, but it just seems like, wow, I wasn't expecting that. So we'll see what the Cincinnati Bengals decide to do in the defensive coordinator position, which by this time next week, that could be news. We'll get to our next question. Thoughts? This is one that I've been thinking about a lot. The Trey Hendrickson stuff. We know how the Cincinnati Bengals treat 30, over 30. And obviously Trey is coming off one of his most incredible years in the NFL. Defensive Player of the Year candidate. We'll see who it goes to. It was obviously a regular season award, and I definitely think he would be in the top 2-3 of that conversation. I do not think Trey Hendrickson is going to want to play on this 1-year deal. We know how he felt last year. Didn't get traded. He played on it. He was amazing. Total pro. Showed up to camp. Didn't impact his play at all. The defense was just bad all around him. What do you think happens with Trey Hendrickson as of January 14th?
As of now, I think he's going to play next year on the Bengals. And what I would do personally is I would keep him and T. Man, this defense without Trey Hendrickson, again, I don't know if people think coaches are miracle workers. That's not a lot of talent. That's pretty low. It's pretty barren on talent to trade Trey Hendrickson and make all those cuts that I assume you have to make because the production doesn't match, the cap number, and then go out there and be like, yeah, new defensive coordinator, go get him. It's like, well, man, how many of these guys would start on other teams? Like on 2 other teams, how many of these guys would start? I don't know. So that would be tough. I think you got to keep Trey because he's the only building block you have on defense. Personally, that's my thought. So I wouldn't trade him. I don't think the Bengals are going to trade him just because they have been very gun shy about trading their players in the past.
Yeah. But you said they're not going to trade him. He's going to play. You think that they're going to extend him?
If it needs done, yeah, I could see it. Like,
I think he deserves it.
Yeah, I think so too. I think the front office will be slow about that. It'll probably be a fight, but I think if push came to shove, they would give him another year on his deal and a pay bump versus trying to trade him somewhere.
And kind of just hitting on this, and then we'll move on to our next question. I will say this, and like a 50-50, understood both situations. Last year, I was like, I'm always, team player get paid, all that. But I understood where the front office was coming from. They're like, hey, we have 2 years left on this deal. You rolled the dice. You signed early. you could have played through that and had an incredible year, and then we would have owed you even more money. So I wasn't really against the front office last year when it was the Trey conversations. I won't get into the Jamar. Everybody knows how we feel about how that didn't get done, and that was an awful decision. Could say the same thing for T. Higgins too. But Trey now, he has played lights out back-to-back years. And like you mentioned, look, these are a solid piece on your defensive side, a side that is struggling. And you still need that production. So I hope they figure something out with Trey. But yeah, I agree with you. It could end up going into camp. I don't think it'll impact camp, but when it comes to an extension possibility with him, and hopefully he gets paid, and hopefully T. Higgins is paid too. Again, that decision is going to be coming sooner than later because that franchise tag could be a possibility, and I hope it isn't. I don't think that's the answer either, but we'll see what the Cincinnati Bengals decide to do with both of them. All right. When you think about the defensive side of the ball and the new defensive coordinator that could be coming in, what currently would make sense when you think about the defensive players that are in the room? And I'm not counting out who they could possibly bring in from free agency or the NFL draft prospects. What are you expecting right now with the pieces they do have with a new defensive coordinator, to be determined on who that is? I know this is kind of a harder question to answer when we don't know the defensive coordinator.
In terms of the front, I think you probably need to be a 4-down base front, which they haven't been the past couple of seasons. They've done that 5-2 type of defense. You just don't have a nose tackle on the roster, in my opinion, that can like be a zero tech, head up over the center, play two gaps. Even McKinley Jackson, I'm sure we've talked a bit about it, but like he's more of a gap shooter. He's more of a guy that gets off the ball really fast. Like that's when he makes good plays. It's not he knocks back to the center and he plays both A gaps like DJ Reader. When they lost DJ Reader, they didn't find a Tavondre Sweat to replace him. You don't have that type of player anymore on the roster. So to me, I think you got to get away from that type of defense front wise. I also love these big edges, and those fit more in the 4-down defense where they're not really dropping off into coverage very often. They're pin their ears back and fly off the ball and go get the quarterback. That's what I think that makes the most sense in terms of the front end. The back end, I think you just got to be multiple. They don't have some high-end talents back there. In my opinion, I don't see a single high-end talent at the moment on the back end. Like you got some guys that can play, but you got nobody that I think, that guy could be a Pro Bowler next year. Like in my brain, I wouldn't predict any of those guys to be Pro Bowlers next year. So you got some guys, but I think you got to be multiple back there. I think you got to be able to mix up your coverages and keep quarterbacks guessing and not able to pick on them. So I would say a 4-down front that gets off the ball fast. And then on the back end, you want to be multiple, play different coverages, man zone, whatever. Just mix things up back there and try to move guys around. And the only other thing is just when you have a unique player like Mike Hilton, I mean, maybe he's here, maybe he's not next year. I think you got to be able to mix in some slot blitzes because otherwise you're kind of wasting his talent, which Lou did do. So I think that is something that should stay.
One more Twitter question, then we'll get to some predictions for the second weekend of the playoffs. Do any deals get done before the draft? I hope so. I really hope so. I hope we're talking extension, but I obviously the T decision has to be made. But that's a trick question because there could be no deal and T. Higgins could be on another team by this time. Draft year. That's a little dark. We are 100 days away from the NFL draft. We're sitting here on a very cold January 14th. Yeah. Mike, any deals done?
You should. I hope so, but I wouldn't guess so.
I know we're both. It's like that awkward silence where we're like, we know the answer.
Deals get done. Like a deal could get done. Yes, like any deal. Sure. But like if you mean specifically, is T, Trey, or Jamar extended before the draft? If that's what that means, or dealt in a trade or whatever, then I'm gonna say probably not. But they'll sign free agents before then.
No.
I don't know if it'll be some big fish.
See, that's where they're setting themselves up to fail. I'm going to be honest with you. If they do not have deals done, at least one of your bigger ones, I would say Jamar T, maybe
Yeah.
Trey in that conversation. If you don't have one of those done before free agency hits, you are failing yourself when it comes to what you can spend in free agency. Say they decide that they I, they're working the money some certain way with T. Higgins, or maybe they say we're going to franchise tag him for the second time, but we're going to work out an extension with him. Well, that money, that decision, that delayed decision that you've made, you could be spending in free agency, but you could have already had T. Higgins locked up in a multi-year deal. They would put themselves in a bad position if they wait until after free agency to get these extensions done. What are you doing in the meantime? You should pretty much be at the finish line for Jamar Chase. I know the number changed with the season he had, but you knew if you waited into the 2025 offseason, the number was only going to go up. He was going to get more than Justin Jefferson no matter what. That's just the wide receiver market. He triple crowned, all pro, amazing, insane career year for him. Get to the finish line, get it done, get it over with. I know they have a lot going on. There's more behind the scenes. There's Senior Bowl, get ready for the draft. The biggest offseason for the front office is as soon as the season ends. They're getting ready for the next one. The guys they're scouting, all of that's important. But get this stuff done. I'm so exhausted from getting into training camp, or we're in July and it's like, oh, the Cincinnati Bengals, they haven't been able to extend Jamar Chase yet. It all impacts everything. And I just don't know why they're so delayed. If they're going to wait till the end of the season, then get it done in January and February.
Yeah. We're saying this, but like, if you had to
You're right.
predict, would they?
No, they won't. No, they won't. They will not do that. They will wait until, oh, we like our little July extension dates. We're going to get them done in July. It's just us. It's what we do. I would love to be wrong. And if I'm wrong, you can come back and remind me, Lindsay, you said they weren't going to get a deal done before the draft. They got them all done. Would be really funny if they got one done January 15th tomorrow and 24 hours later, but I do not expect that at all. I don't expect this to be news. It's just not. They're pretty behind the scenes when it comes to this, and now they have a different agent that they're going to be working with. And it was pretty quiet with the Jamar Chase extensions. We heard a little bit, but nothing too crazy. I don't know. I agree. What we want them to do versus what they will do are two totally different things. But I will say this, not to get too much into extensions. You got to change your mindset when it comes to the guaranteed money, or you're not going to get anywhere as a franchise. You're not going to sustain any success. And obviously they're not right now because they're not in the playoffs. You've got to change your mindset. You got to run like a normal front office. And that is going to be their biggest challenge this offseason outside of what they've paid Joe Burrow.
Absolutely.
So that's all I got. I'm still mad at them, Mike. I'm still mad at them. We'll get into the playoffs right now when it comes to wild card weekend. And look, I will say this. I know that a lot of national writers and media, they were joking and they were like, oh, the committee, they would have put the Bengals in. And I think all that's funny. And obviously there's no committee. The Bengals did it to themselves. We understand. They didn't win enough football games to get in. It almost worked for them to the very, very end, which is absolutely crazy, but it didn't. They didn't do enough. They had the opportunities. You can't let Russell Wilson put up 400 plus at home and their offense can't do anything the rest of the season. You can't let Baltimore, when you have a 2-score lead, get back in the game and win the game. You had a chance versus the Chargers. You had a chance versus Kansas City. They didn't find a way to close those games, and that's something that they got to work on in 2025. What did you think of Wild Card Weekend real quick, and then let's do quick predictions.
Wild Card Weekend was a little bit of a letdown, but, it kind of always is,
Yeah.
I feel like. Like, it's never that it used to be called Super Wild Card Weekend, but like the best weekend has always been this weekend, like
right.
the divisional weekend, because the real weak teams get weeded out, and then these are just the best against the best for the most part.
One of my favorite divisional weekends, and I can't remember all the games. I feel like they all were like down to the wire, but it was when it was the Super Bowl year, divisional weekend,
Mm-hmm.
Titans, Bengals, and there were so many games that were game-winning field goals. It was a crazy weekend, but I agree with you. Divisional weekend is where it's at because you weed out those teams that made it into the wild card and a few upsets. Obviously, the Vikings was an upset, but yeah, it was football. I'm still gonna watch it. While I'm bummed about the season, I'm still going to watch every minute of the playoffs. But just unfortunate that there was only one good game, Commanders and Tampa. But let's go ahead and get to it. Not really in any order, but we'll go by our lower third there. Washington at Detroit. You don't have to give a score prediction. Just tell me what you think is going to happen.
Detroit wins. I think Jane Daniels is fun, and I think Detroit's defense is beat up enough that Washington's going to be able to score. But I think on the other end, Detroit is going to be a machine offensively in this game.
I think Detroit and Washington is going to be what I wanted the Vikings in Detroit to be a couple weeks ago. I wanted it to be a shootout, wanted to see some offense. I agree with both defenses. I think that Detroit's offense will cook. I think Jane Daniels should be pretty fun. You're playing with house money. You're rookie quarterback, you're in the playoffs. You got in, you get the upset, and we'll see what they're able to do. But I think it'll be a fun offensive game. David Montgomery is going to be back out there, and I think that's obviously going to be huge. I don't know if he'll be 100%, but he's full go today. So, it's all or nothing in the playoffs, and I love him and Gibbs. And when it comes to the quarterback, obviously the Commanders have a better team, but I'll go with Detroit in this one in a fun offensive game. This one, Houston, Kansas City. Texans obviously with an upset over the Chargers. What do you think is going to happen?
Kansas City wins. We talked about this being a better weekend, and then it was like, well, these first two games to me are actually kind of like easy pickings. It's everything after that, but the 2-1 seeds I think roll on. Houston, they might be able to give a good fight, but even against the Chargers were imploding, and Houston still. Well, actually, it started Houston kind of imploded a little bit, and the Chargers couldn't take advantage of it. But then it took a while for Houston to finally take advantage of what LA was doing to themselves. So I don't think Houston looks like a team that's ready to take down Kansas City. Maybe they can make it fun. Maybe this is like the Jags-Chiefs game, although Mahomes got injured in that one, where it's a little closer than you would think. But at the end of the day, I think Kansas City is going to roll.
Yeah. Kansas City, man. Nobody has it like them. And look, they earned it. They're 15-1 or 15-2. It's gonna feel like I'm gonna steal a Rex Ryan line. It's gonna be like a bye. Even though they've been off for 25 plus days, I think that they'll be just fine. And they'll be playing in the annual tradition of the AFC Championship game at Arrowhead. But now it comes down to what I think. Honestly, these next two games I think are going to be really fun. Baltimore at Buffalo. Everybody knows Buffalo. They go toe-to-toe in the divisional round. Well, except when they played the Bengals. They go to toe-to-toe with most teams. Josh Allen is a monster. He's really good in the postseason. I can't deny that even when they lose. It's going to be tough. We saw what this matchup looked like in regular season. It was early on in the season, so everything is going to look a little different in January. They are playing at home. Not that makes too much of a difference. Baltimore is really connecting, not only on the offensive side, but even defense. For how much they struggled early on, they're doing enough with some of their playmakers out there. So when you think about these two squads going against each other, Buffalo is the home underdog. What's going to happen?
Yeah, is Zay Flowers playing in this one?
Ooh, I did not see the report.
I'm looking up the Raven injury report.
More than likely off today.
Yeah, I would think so. Flowers was DNP all last week, so I feel like it's probably a little unlikely. Although playoffs, I think if he has a chance of getting out there, he gets out there. Mm-hmm. I'm a little surprised. Ravens are the favorite in this game on the road. I don't know if that is people just loving the Ravens, or if that is people still thinking about what happened last time Buffalo was at home in this situation against the Bengals, or maybe that's just what we think of being biased. This matchup, despite these two teams being like playoff mainstays, has only happened once in recent history, 2020, where the Ravens lost 17-3 to the Bills. I think this will be a little more exciting than that. Yeah, I think this will be a little more exciting than that. This to me is the best game. Unsurprising. This is the best game. This is the game to go watch. This is two top 4 quarterbacks going at it. Chance to go take down Mahomes in the next round, probably. This is tough. This is tough because I think on one hand, the Ravens defense had a statistical turnaround. How much of that is real? I think is the first question I have, where I look at that and like, oh yeah, they played much better defense down the stretch. And you look at who they played, it's like, no, the Browns, Texans, Steelers, Giants, Eagles, who they did lose to and give up 24 points.
Well, when you put it
Chargers,
that way.
yeah, like it's a lot of bad teams, a lot of bad teams they played, except Houston, I guess. But and they held Houston to 2 points. But man, I look at that and I kind of go, I'm not sure if this defense actually turned things around or if they just hadn't played a good team in a while. So interesting. I think that's one thing that has to hold up in this situation. Like Ravens defense versus Bills offense. If I'm going to predict, I think the Bills offense is fine in this game. But on the other end, I think the Ravens are going to do whatever they want offensively because I think they can run the ball against this Bills defense. And when you can't stop the run, I feel like it's hard to win playoff games. It's not that the Bills can't stop the run, but this Ravens run offense is pretty dang good. I don't see Buffalo shutting down the Ravens rushing attack. And that to me becomes the crux of the issue. And I think Baltimore wins, but I would not be surprised either way. This is one where it's a coin flip game where I could see Josh Allen just destroys this Ravens defense, and the Ravens offense, like it has done plenty of times in the past, kind of implodes a little bit. There's a fumble here, like a quarterback snap fumble, and maybe there's a punt return fumble like they do against the Steelers every time they play, and those just become too hard to overcome. So I could see that happening. If I had to predict, I think Baltimore wins though.
I'll flip sides and I'll go Bills. I'll make it really quick. I think there are a lot of similarities between the two teams. Obviously, the two quarterbacks, easy comparison. Both are up for MVP. I still feel like Lamar Jackson's going to win it. If you would have told me
first, it would be weird if Allen won it as second team All Pro. It's the same voters.
Yeah, and good for him. Lamar Jackson had himself a crazy season. It's absolutely crazy that Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow are in the same division, but that's the luck we have. And they can run the ball. I think just two teams that can do that, and obviously two quarterbacks who are mobile. We'll see what the defense looks like. Going to be another shootout. This is going to be one of those games where I pick both teams score a touchdown and a field goal in the first half. I feel like that's a pretty easy prediction, or maybe a passing touchdown, rushing touchdown in the first and second half, because it should be a shootout. It truly should be. Even though the playoffs have been kind of under when it comes to scoring, which makes sense. It's a little bit of a different ball game, but I'll go Buffalo. You go Ravens. Last game, NFC.
Really interesting. Rams Eagles. Man. So you look on one hand, you have the Rams, and I mean, what a dominant performance that they showed against the Vikings, especially on defense. What they did to Sam Darnold reminded me of stuff that's happened to the Bengals, except Burrow was able to overcome 9 sacks and win the game. But and maybe it should have been more closer because, oh my God, that pass that got overturned, the fumble return for a touchdown got overturned as an incomplete pass with a guy in the area because Stafford let the ball go.
That was silly.
I was insane to get overturned upstairs too. You can't even blame the ref crew. It's like, what are you watching? Like, I understand tuck rule, whatever, like the arms going for it. He let go of the ball. Like, to me, that is a fumble at every level. Like, and at the very least, it's grounding because he's not trying to throw that to a receiver. So that was crazy. I guess they got off the field on the next play anyway, so who cares? But I care. Rams, interesting. I think when you have Nakua and Kupp and you have Stafford as your quarterback and Sean McVay calling plays, I usually will take that bet. The interesting thing is one of the guys that stopped McVay originally was Vic Fangio with the Bears, and now he is the defensive coordinator for the Eagles. So it feels like it's not their first time matching back up, I would guess. I guess I'm not sure on that. But this feels like the first high leverage matchup that they've had since years ago when the Rams were on their way to their first Super Bowl berth with McVay, and Fangio just shut them down in Chicago right before the end of the season. We'll see. I think this Eagles defense, to me, this is an under. This is a sneaky under. I think Stafford's a very good player. I think this Eagles offense is great. But I think this is a sneaky under because I think Fangio might win that matchup when it comes to the Rams versus offense versus the Eagles defense. Although I'm not going to put it past Stafford to be able to, he's not going to count him out. Great player, great quarterback, a lot of experience. I think they have the quarterback advantage in this game. On the other end, I think everything the Rams were able to give the Vikings issues with is something that I don't see as an issue with the Eagles. Just like the Vikings guards were porous in pass protection and they have an issue at tackle. The only thing if you had to count on one thing with the Eagles is that their offensive line will be fine. And no matter what these one-on-one matchups are, when you have left to right, Pro Bowler, solid rookie, Mekhi Becton turned his career around and, future Hall of Famer. That's pretty tough to be able to be like, oh yeah, we'll get some pressure on this. We'll just line up our guys, and Braden Fisk and Jared Verse and all these really good players, these really good young defensive linemen are just going to win this matchup. Like, I feel like they get kind of neutered there. And I think they'll be able to do a little bit on defense because I said it's sneaky under game, but I do think at the end of the day, the Eagles offense will do enough to win this.
Okay, I'm going to go against you. I like the Rams. They're so fun. They go into the playoffs at 10-7 on the season, and it just upsets me even more that the Bengals couldn't find a way to win one more game and get into the playoffs as 10-7. You're playing with house money. I like Matthew Stafford. He's been in these positions before. Jalen Hurts has obviously been in these positions before, played in the Super Bowl. But and obviously the Eagles are loaded in pretty much every position possible. They're absolutely insane. And I think it will be a tight, close game. It won't be a lopsided game like we did see against the Vikings. And I loved that Kevin O'Connell called out his interior and was like, hey, front office, you better fix it in the offseason, because that was obviously a huge issue for them last night. But I'm going to go with the quarterback that I believe in right now. And nothing against Jalen Hurts, because I do feel like he's getting criticized for things, and I feel bad for him because obviously he does have a lot of talent, but they're still in this position because of this team as a whole. But I will go with Matthew Stafford, and Puka is one of my favorite wide receivers left in the postseason. They'll find a way to just keep playing with house money to give us the Lions, the Rams, and the NFC Championship game for more storylines in the postseason. Love everything about it. And I think that if the Rams win this game, they're going back to the Super Bowl.
Oh, wow.
I know that was crazy. But hey, I can say that because it might not happen or it might happen.
They lose this one. I wasn't wrong. They didn't win this game.
What are you going to do? Maybe my mindset will change if they win in a close game, and I'll say, you know what? Maybe the line. It's hard to win in Detroit. It is. I mean, they have a crazy home atmosphere, and obviously they're still dealing with injuries. Not to get too far into the NFC Championship. We'll talk about that next week. But I think we're going to get something we've seen before. Bills, Kansas City in the AFC Championship, and then I think we'll go and see the Lions and the Rams in the NFC side. So that'd be a lot of fun storylines. Obviously, I'm a little bitter still, but should be fun football this weekend. I'm looking forward to a couple of those matchups, honestly. And Mike, what's going on over on Bengals Talk?
Whenever I finally recover, I'm going to get that McKinley Jackson article up. But yeah, last week I couldn't write. This week maybe I'll be able to just cough my way through it, like I've been doing today. So
new game.
Yeah, we're just gonna try to live, and maybe there'll be a surprise article up. And the only thing I will add, isn't it shocking how often the Texans play Saturday at 4:30? Because
4:30. It was guaranteed. It was guaranteed. 4:30. They're like, Texans, all right, you are penciled in.
They did the wild card round. They did this round. They've done it like every single time the Texans have made the wild card round. Yep. It is so funny to look at. Like, they are just Saturday, 4:30 every time. Texans. Doesn't matter any other game that's going on.
I still have PTSD thinking about the 2011, 2012, but that was a long time ago. And we know how those ended. But yeah, should be a good weekend. Make sure you check out Mike's work. Soon, McKinley Jackson. He's obviously playing the flu game, as I mentioned before. We're covering over the last few weeks. Plenty of content coming your way. Make sure you follow Mike over on Twitter, Bengals_Sands. You can follow me at Ellen Diaz Patterson. Thank you for your mailbag questions. We'll be back next week. Hopefully some more Bengals news on It's Always Game Day in Cincinnati.